situating this message within the context of Africa, it has larger application beyond this context. But I try to situate it within the context because I think that there are important lessons we have to learn as a people and as nations on the continent of Africa. I asked the question, why are we where we are? And I said that there are different answers and responses to that question. Some people say we are where we are because of what we are. And others say that we are where we are because of where we are. And there are those who say we are where we are because of how we have been treated. The first answer indicates that there is something wrong with our being, with our personalities, with our nature. There is something genetically wrong with us as Africans or black people. And sometimes you get to feel, even if you don't think that way, you get to feel that there must be something wrong with us. When the crisis in Rwanda took place, in the space of 100 days, in the nation of about 8 million people, almost 1 million people were killed in 100 days with low technology equipment like machetes. This was not mass bombing. This was one machete at a time killing individuals. And you wonder, how can a people do so much damage to themselves in so short a time? During the Gulf War, there were protests in Nigeria about the American invasion in the first Gulf War. And out of that protest, protesting the war against Iraq, 400 people were killed in a protest against the war. And it happened in about 3 days. It seems as if we have a capacity for damaging ourselves at such levels that it almost becomes either demonic or inexplicable. So sometimes you are forced to draw the conclusion that there is something wrong with us and our personalities. And you find the same parallel wherever black people are, whether it's in America or any other place. They do more damage to themselves than anybody has done to them. So is there something wrong with what we are? And some people also say there is something, we are where we are because of where we are located. And I touched that last night. My answer is that we are where we are because of what we believe and do. And it is my conviction that if we can change the belief system, we can change the actions. And when we change the belief and the actions, we will change the consequences. And I quoted Albert Einstein yesterday, who said that the significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level we were at when we created them. If you want to solve the problems you have today, you have to move beyond where you are now. We also looked at Jacob and Esau. And we said that Jacob and Esau are not simple individuals, but representatives of systems that govern the thoughts and belief systems of nations and people. We said that Jacob buys the future. He uses what he has to acquire what he desires. And he invests today's seed in order to acquire tomorrow's forest. He chooses what he can become over what he is already. Then we talked about Esau, and we said Esau sells the future. He indulges his desires on the altar of instant gratification. He wants it now. He cannot wait. He consumes today's seed and hopes for a great harvest tomorrow. He doesn't believe in consequences. He thinks that his actions are divorced from reactions. And he chooses what he has now over what he can become. He's more focused in the present than in the future. The future is an imagination. The past is a memory. Both the future and the past occur in the mind. One is an activity that goes backwards, and the other is an activity that goes forward. For those who are able to buy the future, they don't rely on just memory, but they are able to conceive the pictures of tomorrow. And we also talked about how Esau lost his blessing. And I promised that today we're going to look at Esau and how he was able to change his situation. It's not too bad for Esau after all. There is hope for Esau. Because what we're going to learn today is that Esau and Jacob are not just people. They are systems. They are cultures. They are ways of thinking. And you would discover from the Bible that there were times that Esau became a Jacob. And there were times that Jacob became an Esau. You remember when Jacob was going to marry? He became an Esau. He negotiated 7 years' wages for one wife. And then negotiated an additional 7 years, 14 years for the same woman. Because at that time, he was driven by his appetite. And when you're driven by appetite, you would get into some very, very serious negotiations that can harm you terribly in the future. And so Jacob, in that situation, acted with an Esau mentality. He wanted it now. As a matter of fact, when he discovered he had the wrong woman on the night of his wedding, he went into renegotiation instantly. And he worked for his father-in-law for 14 years. Be careful what you're negotiating for. And later on, when his father-in-law wanted to negotiate his salary with him, Jacob went back to being Jacob. Because his father-in-law says, "Name me your wages." Jacob says, "I don't want wages. I want a part of the business." Esau's are wage earners. Jacob's are business owners. And one of the things that the colonial masters did to African nations is that they taught us to be managers of their business and not the developers of our own business. We became nurses, doctors, teachers, civil servants, and that's all we were trained to be. And that's why you go to most African nations, the Africans are in the thousands and millions of the population, but own almost nothing. Oh yes. You come to my own country, Ghana, it's the same thing. We've been free for quite a long time, longer than you have. From 1957, we were the first independent African nation. And yet the wealth of Ghana for a long time was not in Ghanaian hands. Not because somebody prevented us from having it, but because we were trained only to manage Laban's business and not to own our own flock. And that's an Esau mentality, which we have to break. Well, turn with me in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 27, and we would look at verse number 38. The background to this story, or to this account, is that Esau rushes back from the field and discovers that the blessing of the birthright had been given to his brother Jacob. The scripture says he trembled when he heard that. Isaac actually trembled because it was very frightening. Something quite significant had taken place unawares to him. And Esau comes and he is told that the blessing had passed on to Jacob. And he begins to plead. And listen to what he pleaded for. Because this is the key, or this is the beginning of the process of change for Esau. And Esau said to his father, "Have you only one blessing, my father? Bless me also, O my father." And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. It seems like a very simple prayer, but that simple prayer represented a shift in Esau's values. He shifted. That incident created a shift in his value system, a shift in his paradigm. And what were the shifts? There were 3 shifts that he made. Number 1, he shifted from taking God's blessings for granted to valuing his blessings. Number 2, he shifted from wastage in abundance to managing in scarcity. And number 3, he shifted from doing little with much to doing much with little. When people have a sense that what they have has no limits and has no end and is infinite, they tend to mismanage what they have. And when people have an idea that what they have is limited, they tend to manage well what they have. As a matter of fact, the whole principle, the whole discipline of economics is based on managing scarce resources. Economics takes it for granted that what we have has limits. And because of that, we have to manage that to our greatest advantage. But when you live in a society where you think it will always be there will always be gold, there will always be diamond, there will always be abundance, you tend to take things for granted. And that was Esau's problem. He took things for granted. I heard a story, I'm not sure whether it's apocryphal or whether it's true, but I heard that when some of the foreign adventurers, the colonialists, came to some of the countries in Africa, a particular country in your region, and I'm not going to mention the name, they saw people, kids, playing with stones in the sand. They didn't know what the stones were. But the colonialist saw these kids playing with the stones and realized that they were diamonds. And these kids had no value system to appreciate that what they were playing with had value. They took diamonds for granted. So these guys came and said, "Can you give us your stones?" They said, "Why not? You can take all the stones you want. We'll give you a few sweets." So they gave them some toffees, some candies. And they said, "You know what? We like these stones. So you just pick a lot for us and we'll give you more candy." And the children thought they had a good deal. So they picked more stones for them and they got a lot of candy. Then these individuals took the stones, went to polish them, sold them, acquired more money, and came to collect more stones. And within a few short years, they had bought the land on which the people were living and owned all the stones. Then the people who lived on the land got angry one day and said, "We've been treated unfairly, unjustly." The question is, were they treated unfairly or unjustly? No, sir. If you don't know what you have and you don't value what you have, somebody with a higher value system will buy your future out from you. Woe on you when God endows you with much which you are not aware of. Esau had a lot, but he took them for granted. I pray that in our time and in our generation, we will be able to shift from dealing with abundance to managing with little. Productivity is not how much you can do with abundance, but how much you can do with little. Then in verses 39 and verse 40 of the same chapter 27 of Genesis, Isaac decides to bless Esau. And I want you to listen to the blessing. Then Isaac his father answered and said to him, "Behold, your dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass, when you become restless, that you shall break his yoke from your neck." The Amplified Bible says, "Then Isaac his father answered, your blessing and dwelling shall come from the fruitfulness of the earth and from the dew of the heavens above. By your sword you shall live and serve your brother. But," everybody say but, "the time shall come when you will grow restive and break loose, and you shall tear his yoke from your neck." So there was an escape route for Esau. He was not going to get the birthright in its fullness, but he was given an opportunity to be free from being subservient to Jacob. The birthright included the Messianic line, and he was never going to get that. That had gone totally to Jacob. But in terms of wealth acquisition, he was not supposed to be under Jacob for the rest of his life. And there are two parts to the blessing that was given to Esau from Jacob. There are two parts. The first part of the blessing says that he was going to be blessed with the fatness of the earth, that is natural resources. Number two, he was going to be blessed with the dew of heaven, that is spiritual heritage. And number three, he was going to have the ability to fight, the sword. He would live by the sword. That's the first part of the blessing. natural resources, spiritual heritage, ability to fight. And all these blessings were going to come. But Isaac said something concerning these three blessings: the fatness of the earth, the dew of heaven, and the living by the sword. He says, even when you have all these blessings, you will still serve your brother. So it's possible to have the fatness of the earth, the dew of heaven, and have the ability to fight and still be poor and serve Jacob. You know, when I look at our continent, we have all the three. We have the fatness of the earth. We are the most anointed continent. The most prayerless African will be a champion prayer warrior in most nations. Oh yes. I mean, we pray as a matter of course. I mean, average people pray 3 hours in the night. And they just pray for a shoe and they pray 3 hours. People have all-night prayer meeting just for a shirt. We are prayer machines. Miracles happen in our nations like nobody's business. People in the villages work miracles. Powerful things happen. And yet in the midst of all that, we are the poorest, most deprived, most underdeveloped continent on the face of the earth. That's almost unacceptable. How can we have so much of the dew of heaven and still be at the bottom of the ladder? The third blessing says that you're going to live by the sword. And Esau's are very angry people. They hate everybody. They hate themselves first. They hate their neighbors. And they hate Jacob too. But because they cannot kill Jacob, they kill themselves first and kill each other second and then think about how to get Jacob. But Jacob is so protected, we can't kill him. So you find that Esau was going to be blessed with the ability to fight. Strength. And when you check the history of the world, most underdeveloped nations have also produced the strongest people. In sports, anything that takes energy, Esau's are good at it. They are powerful, strong. They can box you. They can outrun you. They can outjump you. And still, they serve their brother Jacob. Then he added the second part of the blessing. And he said, but, everybody say but. When he said a but, he was introducing a new concept that was contrary to the first one. The first three blessings, he says, when you have them, you will still serve your brother. But when you become restless, you will break the yoke of your brother from your neck. So the breakthrough for Esau was not in the fatness of the earth or the dew of heaven or the living by the sword. It was in the blessing of becoming restless. And I like how the Bible puts it. He says, when you become. Everybody say, when you become. Oh, say it again. When you become. You see, the blessing of the birthright was due Esau because of established traditional order. Everybody say established traditional order. But the blessing of breaking the yoke was going to be his because of deliberate personal effort. Everybody say deliberate personal effort. In the blessing of the birthright, he didn't need to do anything to have the birthright. He only had to be born first. It was just natural. It was the established order. It's like Africans. We didn't do anything to have a rich continent. We just had a great continent with great wealth and great resources. But that's the birthright. Unfortunately, Great Britain took the birthright from us. But to break the yoke, it's going to come from deliberate personal effort. And the key word is when you become. Say it with me. When you become. Say it again. When you become. The implication of that is that you have not become. When you become implies that Esau was not what he was supposed to be. When you become restless. So if he was supposed to become restless, then it implies that he was not restless. If he was not restless, then he was rested. He was at ease in Zion. He was passive. And it's amazing sometimes when you see people who are so underdeveloped, so poor, and yet so contented with their lives. They make jokes about their situation. They laugh at their situation. They make fun about their own situation. And what they are going through is not funny. And yet they make jokes out of it. They are rested. They are okay. They are poor, but they are okay. And sometimes I hear a lot of Africans say, well, we may be poor, but we are spiritually anointed. My brother, you're still under Jacob. And when you have that passivity, which does not struggle against your situation, you just acclimatize and you stay comfortably. It's like the situation of the frog and the hot water. You heard that? If you put a frog or a toad in a little container of water, maybe a saucepan, and the water is cool enough, the frog will be very comfortable in the saucepan. If you put it on the stove, that saucepan on the stove, and start heating the water and increase the heat very gradually, it will continue to adjust to all the heat levels. And it will adjust and adjust and adjust. And as you raise the heat, it will adjust. You raise the heat, it adjusts. You raise it, it adjusts. Until it gets permanently adjusted. It will not jump because it is rested. So the situation gets worse, we adjust. It gets worse than last year, we adjust. It gets worse than the previous year, we adjust. And for most Africans, as the situation gets worse, we adjust and adjust and adjust and adjust until there is no room for adjustment. How can nations get to where they get to? Because the people adjusted. So God said to Esau, if you adjust to this arrangement between you and Jacob, you are doomed for life. But when you become, everybody say you become. When implies a period and a process. It means that there is going to come a time when you would say, enough is enough. And until you say enough is enough, you will stay where you are and perish where you are. Listen to me, my Esau friends. If you're going to break the yoke, something in you must rebel. When we talk about dominion and aggression, we are not joking and playing words. We are talking about a change in a people, a change in mind, and a change in attitude. But he says there must come a time when, and then he says become. The word become implies change and transformation. So there's going to be a period of change and transformation. And that period of change and transformation will move you from passivity to restlessness. I have related to many black people from different cultures. Black people on the motherland, in West Africa, Central Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa. Black people in Brazil, black people in the UK, black people in America, black people in Australia, and almost in every situation, they have the same attitudes. They are rested. They're the most spiritual people, the most dynamic, and yet the most deprived. The deliverance of Esau is rooted in his ability to change his personality from a passive individual to a restless individual. And the idea of restlessness that Isaac introduced to Esau is the idea of an ox that has been yoked at the neck. Normally, when an ox is yoked at the neck, it just becomes stable because the yoke limits it to a particular space and a particular function. But he says when you become restless, it gives the picture of an ox that begins to turn its neck and says no, 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 and becomes so restless and begins to move around until it weakens the yoke and breaks it off its neck. You cannot say yes to every situation that you are in. We cannot just continue saying yes, it's all right, it is well with my soul. When your soul is not at rest, don't say it is well with your soul. Sometimes it's good for your soul to be troubled. And I believe God is calling us as a people, as a church, as Africans, to break the pattern of rest of passivity. Let's look at a few things about restlessness. Restlessness begins with discontentment. It begins with discontentment. The 4 lepers at the gate of Samaria became restless. They had sat at the gate for years. Now there was a crisis in their country, and they couldn't even have access back to the city. And they sat there at the gate, and they said, "Why do we sit here until we die?" If lepers can get discontented, you can also get discontented. If lepers who all their lives have been mistreated and called unclean will rise to the occasion and say, "Enough is enough. We're not going to sit here and die. We're not going to continue just working and working and working and earning low salaries and low salaries and low salaries and believing God for a breakthrough for the last 30 years." Something must happen in you to tell you, I can't take this again. It's called discontentment. And I can tell you, Africans are the easiest people to make happy. We get happy. I mean, we drum and we dance at the least provocation. When a child is born, we dance. When somebody dies, we dance. I mean, we are just happy. Don't worry, be happy. We sing, we dance. Prices go high, we dance. Inflation is high, why not? Just dance. So as a matter of fact, if you go to almost every African country, the greatest expression of their culture is dancing and drumming. And we have no slow dances and no slow drumming. Everything is energy. We have to kick, we have to sweat. So we dance away our pain, we dance away our frustrations, and never confront our situation. Because we are easy to satisfy. I've traveled to several African countries. The easiest way to win an election is just buy a few tins of milk, a few provisions, a few items here and there. I don't know what happens here, but in Ghana, you get a few sardines and a few corned beef and take it to the village and you get all the votes. So easy to satisfy. I was talking to a gentleman in my country. This guy is a laborer, and sometimes I just try to find out how people think. So I was talking to this gentleman, and the last election, I said, whom are you going to vote for? And he because our appetites are so basic and fundamental. No aspirations. So the first stage of restlessness is discontentment. Why sit we here until we die? Discontentment must produce questions. Why are we here? Why do we sit here? Why must I suffer? Why must my grandfather be poor? My father is poor. I am poor. And my children are poor. Something must be wrong. How come I've done this thing for the last 30 years and my life has not improved? How come I keep doing the same things and don't have different results? You have to question your life. It's very important. And anyone who has brought about transformation in their individual lives have started with restlessness and questions. The independence movement in Africa, the freedom movements, began after the Second World War. I'm not sure of what happened in Zimbabwe, but in our country, Ghana, during the Second World War, Adolf Hitler was threatening Europe, the rest of Europe, including our colonial masters, Great Britain. And Great Britain did not want to serve under Hitler. So they started fighting. But Britain is a very tiny country. They didn't have enough people. So they came to Ghana, went to Nigeria, went to Sierra Leone, went to Gambia, went to other countries and recruited our people to go and fight for them so they would not be under bondage to Hitler. So our people went and they fought everywhere. They fought in North Africa. They fought in Asia. They fought to liberate Great Britain. And when they went to war, they realized that after all, the same bullet that kills the African also kills the British. So these guys are not special anyway. I mean, they die just like us. And they are afraid of Hitler. So after the war, the servicemen who went to the war came back and said, why must we also bow to Britain? If they think it is wrong to bow to Hitler, then it is wrong for us to bow to them. So discontentment raised questions. And as we began to raise questions, a movement was built up. And that movement from 1945 accelerated. For us in Ghana, by 1950, the British couldn't take it any longer. So they gave us the first part of freedom, where they gave us the authority to rule our own government with them still at the top. And then by 1957, we said, I think it's enough. Just thank you for visiting our country. Thank you for giving us a nice language. We can now talk your language. We appreciate everything you've done, but just move along a little bit. So we became independent. But that came about because people were discontented and people raised questions. For some reason, Christians almost never raise questions because we are called believers. Not thinkers or questioners or seekers. We are believers. And believers never question. So if the gentleman prays for the last 20 years and he's prayed and prayed, oh God, give me breakthrough. Oh Lord, I claim the breakthrough, and he bind all in the ancestral spirits and dislodge all the demons in the hemisphere, and he's still broke, he would never sit back to question, what is wrong? He will continue doing it and binding the demons and binding more demons and binding them and casting them out, but never questing. Isaac said to Esau, you have to be restless. You have to be discontented, and you have to question your own life. The quality of your questions will determine the quality of your answers. If you ask the wrong questions, you will get the wrong answers. If you ask the question, for example, why have they done that to us? You will get a wrong answer. But if you ask the question, why have I allowed this to happen to me? You'll get the right answer. Because one of the questions centers your solution in somebody's choice and preference. But the second question centers the solution in your own adjustments. Because Jacob would never give you what you have or what you desire by choice. He wouldn't. You have to fight for it yourself. Questions must produce new revelations. And we came back to what Albert Einstein said. The significant problems we have cannot be solved at the same level we were at when we created them. So if I'm going to rise from where I am, my questions must not produce yesterday's answers. If I keep coming up with yesterday's answers, I will get yesterday's results. So if I ask yesterday's questions, I must get new answers. And for a long time, I used to have problem with most African countries and leaders because our answers were always the same. Colonialism, imperialism, and all the isms. And they took us and they brainwashed us and they enslaved us and they did that to us. And we kept coming with the same answers. Because if they did it to us and we cannot change them, then we have no recourse. But if we allowed it, then we can disallow it. The power now is in our hands. The questions must produce new revelations. And new revelations must lead to new beliefs. Yesterday, Pastor Pitts here did some serious work on that. And I think it would be good to get that tape on how to change your beliefs. Because if you don't change your beliefs, you don't change what you believe, you cannot change what you do. You can't even change what you feel about yourself. New beliefs will produce new actions. Because your actions are predicated on your beliefs. New actions will produce a new lifestyle. And a new lifestyle will produce new results. Isaac said to Esau, nobody's going to do it for you. You're going to do it for yourself. When you become restless, you will break the yoke from your neck. We are believing God to raise millionaires in this ministry. Well, you didn't get it the first time. I'll rewind and say it again. We are believing God to raise millionaires. Not Zimbabwean dollar millionaires. Not even American dollar millionaires. I'm talking about British pound. which is twice the American dollar. The British are still great. Great Britain. But we are believing God for mighty millionaires. But I have never seen a millionaire who is employed and paid a salary by somebody. If you're going to break from that, then something must happen in your mind. Because every crisis also has within it an equal opportunity. In a time of war, while some industries collapse, others grow. Did you notice what happened during the last Gulf War when there was uncertainty? All those who produced military hardware and uniforms had their stocks going up. So in the crisis of Zimbabwe, there is an equal opportunity. And if you ask the right questions, you'll discover the opportunities. Within your nation, there is opportunity for growth. And you can become what God wants you to become, even within the current crisis in your country. You don't need necessarily for the economy to improve before your life improves. Your life is not determined by the budget of the government of Zimbabwe. Your life is determined by your internal resources and the favor of God. So you can go out there and make a difference. But you have to be restless. That means you're going to acquire skills you didn't have now. You're going to learn to do things differently. You're going to learn to think differently. You're going to learn to behave differently. You're going to shift your paradigm. And when you make the shift within the same context you are in, doors will open which have already been in existence but which you never noticed. Whilst people are leaving Zimbabwe, others are coming to Zimbabwe. Oh yes. There are nations that are now targeting your country and are coming here to make money. And your people are leaving here to go to the UK. And whilst you are leaving, there is a replacement. And if we don't change that in the next 30 years, it will not be land reform. It will be another people reform. Because the people left and the new people came. So the opportunities are here. But we need people to become restless. Tell the person next to you, become restless. Become restless. Because when you become restless, you're going to turn this thing around. Let me just close. I don't do 2 minutes, I do 2 hours. I don't have too much time to go into Esau. But did he change? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Because if you study about Esau, he became ruler over princes and lords. And when he came to meet Jacob, he was no longer a hunter. He had his herds of flock. He had changed his mindset. He had cultivated some herds and some cattle. He had shifted. And you would also notice he was no longer bitter. Why? Because he had also discovered the secret. And he discovered, I don't need to be bitter. I can learn his ways and I can win my game. That's why I'm not angry against Great Britain, because I can learn their ways and I can win my own game. I don't have to fight Britain. I don't have to fight America. I don't need to fight them. I don't need to fight the white man. Because when you learn the ways of Jacob, the bitterness of your former losses will be replaced by the joy of your current achievements. Hallelujah. And I like a statement that Esau made when Jacob came to meet him and had all these cattle in front of him as gifts to Esau. And Esau says, my brother, I don't need these because I have enough. I have enough. I don't need it. We don't need the World Bank. We don't need the IMF because we have enough. Oh God, lift up your hands to God. Lift up your hands to God and just say, Lord, give me a spirit of restlessness. Oh, talk to him from your heart. Begin to question restlessness, discontent, a spirit of restlessness.